If you're an Intune admin or you've been handed the job of managing certificates on managed devices and you're trying to set it up, this video is for you. We'll cover the full landscape of Intune MDM, SCEP, and managing certificates centrally in Infisical. Now, Microsoft's answer to this is ADCS with the NDES role. This is the setup that their docs walk you through, and it requires you to set up a Windows server, join it to a domain, and publish it to the internet. If you'd rather not do all of this, Intune does support third-party certificate authorities. So we're going to use Infisical for ours. Now, Infisical handles the CA, the issuance rules, and the SCEP endpoint that devices talk to all in one place. By the end of this video, you'll have a certificate authority you own and a certificate issued to an Intune managed device. From there, you can point it at Wi-Fi, Radius, VPN authentication, or wherever else needs it. Now, we'll start from scratch, but I'm going to assume that you know a little bit about device management, Intune, and profiles. We'll get deeper into SCEP, Infisical, and the whole certificate lifecycle. And as I go through these concepts, I'll show diagrams so that you can see how all of the pieces fit together. There's also a written guide in the description that follows exactly the steps that I go through in this video. It's worth noting that SCEP enrollment and the Microsoft Intune connection both need a paid Infisical plan. Now, let's get into it. So we have three moving parts today: a certificate authority, Intune, and then the device itself. First, the certificate authority, which in our case is going to be Infisical. On its own, a certificate is just a file with a name and a public key in it, and anyone can generate one. Now, a certificate has to be signed. It has to be signed by something that your devices already trust. Producing that signature is what our certificate authority does. And of the three moving parts, Infisical is the only one that does it. And next we have Intune. Now, Intune is going to decide which devices should get a certificate, and it's going to do this by pushing down a certificate profile. Now, Infisical checks with Intune before issuing anything, and Intune itself never issues a certificate. And our third moving piece is the device. The device generates a key pair, which is two matching halves. Now, it keeps the private half secure locally, and it'll ask Infisical for a certificate for the public half. Now, this is an important note. The device itself asks for a certificate instead of Infisical just giving it one. So Intune decides who should ask and confirms that each request is real. The device does the asking and holds that private key, and then Infisical signs the certificate. Now, in order for all of this to work, there are actually two certificates at play, and they do two different things. Now, the first is your CA certificate, which we'll get out of Infisical. This is a public certificate, and it'll end up in the trusted root store of every device. The job of this certificate is to let your device recognize the things that your certificate authority has signed. Without it, your devices have no way to differentiate between a certificate that's signed by your certificate authority or just a random certificate that someone created. The second certificate that we'll talk about is this certificate that all of your devices will get. Now, each device gets its own. It's going to be unique to it, and that's the device's identity. So one of them says who all of the devices will trust, in our case, Infisical, and one of them says who the device itself is. So when we're setting up Intune later, we'll actually make two different profiles for each of these respective certificates, and we'll apply both of them to our test device. Now, before we get started, because I've mentioned it a couple of times, what is Infisical? Infisical is an open source platform for managing secrets and certificates. Now, it has a ton of products and features, but the specific one that we'll be using today is called Certificate Manager. And everything that happens in this video happens inside of a Certificate Manager project. You can use Infisical Cloud or run it yourself. If you want a full tour on how certificate management inside of Infisical works, I'll leave a video that we made on that linked below. Okay, so before we get rolling with setting things up, I'd like to talk about what all the moving pieces are in Infisical. Now, there are 4 layers of abstraction, and it's kind of important that we know how they all fit together. At the bottom, we have our certificate authority, or CA for short. This is the thing that signs our certificates. Now, CA has its own expiry date, and when a CA expires, every certificate that it's ever signed stops being trusted. Generally, we want this expiry date to be much farther out than the lifetime of our certificates. Often, this is going to be years. Now, above the CA and Infisical, we have our second layer of abstraction, which is our certificate policy. Certificate policy is a rule set for what's allowed to be issued at all. So, for example, which subject attributes can appear in a certificate, which subject alternative names, the time to live, so how long our certificate can remain valid, which algorithms and key usages are acceptable. And when we make our policy, you're going to see that we can either allow, deny, or require certain things. These are the rules for how things are issued. And then above the policy is our third layer of abstraction, which is the certificate profile. This is where an application team says how they want their certificates to come out, so how long they last for, what they can be used for. The profile points at the CA for signing, and whatever it asks for has to stay within this rule set that we've set in the certificate policy. And then at the very top, we have our application. Now, the application is the thing in our org that needs certificates. For example, your Intune managed laptops are an application. An internal API or a Kubernetes cluster might be a different application. Now, this is the level where we're going to choose our profile. We're going to choose the way our clients will enroll, and then we'll also look at the certificates that have been issued. So really quickly, let's set all this up in Infisical. In Infisical, I will click the Certificate Manager product type, Certificate Authorities here on the left side, and create an internal CA. We'll call it Jake's root CA. CA type is going to be root. For my common name, I'll put GX root CA R1. Key source we'll leave as Infisical. Key algorithm we'll put as RSA 4096. Validity date we'll leave as 2036, 10 years from now. Path length at -1 is totally fine. We'll continue. And we should be able to create our CA. Now over here, I'll go to certificate policies and I'm going to create one. Policy name, I'll call it Intune device certs. Description we'll leave blank and policy preset we'll keep as custom. We are not going to restrict subject attributes and subject alternative names, so we'll continue. Now, in terms of algorithms, we will restrict signature algorithms to SHA-256 RSA, and key algorithms will put RSA 2048 and RSA 2096. We'll continue. Key usages will allow digital signature and key encipherment, and EKU we're going to allow client auth. And then for our last constraints, maximum validity we'll leave at 365 days, and we will turn this on as well, and we'll create policy. Now we're going to go to certificate profiles, and we'll create one. We're going to call this Intune device auth. Issuer, we're going to point it at the certificate authority that we just created, and then also the certificate policy that we just created. Now, certificate defaults, time to live, we're going to put at 1 year, and we'll put this into Intune later as well. Here for our defaults, we'll use RSA 256, key algorithm, RSA 2048. Usages, we'll click our 2 usages, and then client auth for our EKU, and we can create the profile. Then we'll go to applications on the left side, and we'll create an application. Application, we're going to call this corporate laptops Jake. And here we'll connect our Intune device auth profile that we just created, and we'll create the application. So we've built everything we need to build in Infisical, but nothing can request a certificate from Infisical yet because we haven't given anything away to do it. So we'll set that up now. We have to connect Infisical and Intune. When a device sends a certificate request to Infisical, Infisical has to ask Intune whether that request was actually authorized. In order for Microsoft to answer that request, since there's nobody signed in this flow, we have to give Infisical its own identity in Microsoft. Now, this service identity is what an app registration is in Entra. The name is a little bit confusing because it's called app registration. So this is not an app that we're going to install on somebody's device or that we install for a user. You create this app registration, you give it permission to do a couple of things, and then we give it credentials that we're going to put back into Infisical so that Infisical can talk with Microsoft. We'll head over to the Microsoft Entra Admin Center, and we'll click here on the left side, App Registrations. Up here at the top, I'll click New Registration. And for my name, I'm going to call this Infisical SCEP Validation, and I'll put my name. We can leave this as single tenant, and we'll click Register. Now this will take me here, and I need to add some API permissions to this. So I'm going to click Add a Permission. For Intune, I'm going to add Application Permissions, and the permission is SCEP Challenge Provider. And then we'll add one more for Microsoft Graph. We're going to add Application Permission, Application Read All. And then important, I need to grant admin consent for Infisical. So we'll click Yes. Now together, these let Infisical find Intune's validation service and check certificate requests against it. And both of them need to have that admin consent across the tenant. Now we're going to need to grab and save 3 values. First, our application ID, our directory ID, and we're going to create a client secret. For my client secret, I'm going to put it at 730 days, and we'll click Add. Now copy the secret value while it's on the screen because it will not show up after this. And then we also have to remember this expiry that we picked, because when this secret expires, certificate enrollment stops and the error won't obviously point back here. Now we're going to head back to Infisical and we'll click Settings and we're going to create a app connection. Now this app connection is going to be Microsoft Intune. And for my name, I'll call it Microsoft Intune Prod Jake. Method we'll leave as client secret, and here it's going to ask for the values that we just grabbed. So I'll copy in my client secret. From Azure, I'll grab my application ID, my client ID, and then I will also grab my directory, my tenant ID, and paste those in. Now, right when I save this, Infisical checks them, and if we see successfully added Microsoft Intune connection, this means that the permission and the consent was set up correctly. So now we have Infisical set up, and we have our Microsoft Entra app registration set up so that Infisical and Intune can talk to each other. Every device needs to ask for its certificate, and SCEP, the Simple Certificate Enrollment Protocol, is the protocol that it uses to do that. Back in Infisical, I'm going to go to my application, click Settings, and I'm going to find that profile that I just made, and I'm going to click Configure under Enrollment Methods. Here we'll add an enrollment method, and our enrollment method is going to be SCEP. Now, an enrollment in Infisical is something that turns a profile into an endpoint that something can actually talk to. So here we have a challenge type. For challenge type, we're going to choose Microsoft Intune, and it's going to have us choose an Intune connection. And we'll choose the connection that we just made. Now, this challenge type is what proves whether a certificate request is allowed to be fulfilled. With SCEP, a lot of times this will be a shared password, but with this Intune connection, Intune is going to generate a separate single-use challenge for each device. And then Infisical, as mentioned, is going to check in with Intune before issuing anything, so we don't have to share a password at all. Now, this is important. We're going to have sign RA certificate with the CA on. Intune requires it, and this cannot be changed after the enrollment is created. And we can leave this on as well, and we'll click enable. Now, once we enable, we get our SCEP endpoint URL. We'll come back to this in a bit. Now, one note, if you're self-hosting Infisical, this URL is going to be what all of your devices talk to. So it has to be reachable from wherever your devices are. And we'll save this. Now we have to set up trust between your devices and Infisical. Your devices need your CA's certificate before the rest of this works. And this is the first of the 2 certificates that we talked about earlier. So we go to Certificate Authorities. We click on the CA that we made. We'll click here on CA Certificate 1, and we're going to download CA certificate. Now, Infisical exports this as a PEM file, and Intune's upload field only takes a .cer. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this to .cer. Then I'm going to head over to Intune, and I'm going to click over here on the left side, Devices, and I'll click Configuration, and then I'm going to create a new policy. So for platform, pick your platform. I'm going to choose Mac OS. And profile type is going to be a template, and template is going to be trusted certificate. Now, this is actually the first of 2 Intune policies that we're going to make. And this trusted certificate profile is going to do one job. It is going to install the certificate authority certificate onto every device that I assign this policy to. Now, what does this mean? I'm putting this root certificate authority into the trust store of every device in scope, as we talked about earlier. And so from then on, those devices trust anything that this CA signs. So we'll give it our name, click next. Now, before we actually assign this, the deployment channel will depend on which platform you used. On Apple, it lets you set a deployment channel, but we'll use device channel. That's because this certificate identifies the machine as opposed to the person, and this will put it in the system keychain. I can't change this later without creating a new profile. And I'll choose my CER file. Now, if you're doing this on Windows, Windows doesn't have a deployment channel. It just has a destination store instead. And since we made a root CA, you're going to want the computer certificate store root. Go ahead next, and here we're going to assign it to the groups or the computers that should be getting certificates. So here I'll add a group, and I have this group that I've already included my device in. That'll be Jake's SCEP devices. We'll click next, and we'll create. Okay, so I have my policy created in Intune. Now under here, in the same place, I'm going to actually create my second policy. We'll select the platform. Profile type, again, is going to be templates, and this time our template name is going to be SCEP certificate. We'll give it a name. Configuration settings, again, if you're on Apple, we're going to choose device channel for our deployment channel. Certificate type, we'll leave as device. Now, subject name format, this one's actually pretty important. The subject name is the identity that's written into the certificate. Now, you write it as a template in Intune using these double curly braces like this, and then Intune is going to fill this in per device when it delivers the profile. So CN is our common name, and it's the main identifier. The simplest one here would be CN equals these braces and then device name. But a user can change their device name. So if you want something that the user can't change, you can leave it as this default AAD device ID. Now, this is the device's Entra ID, and this is a common choice for network authentication. It's actually really important which one you pick as well, because whatever authenticates later, whether that's Radius, VPN, Wi-Fi, it'll match on this name. So if your Radius server is configured to match on this Entra ID, and you've set this up with device name, authentication is not going to work. But the thing is, the certificate would still be valid. It would just be issued with something that your Radius is not set up to match with. So just be cognizant of this. Now, one other important thing, recall in Infisical, we didn't put any defaults for the subject and the SAN sections. We left them unconfigured. So anything is allowed, and this just works. If you tighten this up in Infisical, the pattern that you use here has to be on this allow list, or else Intune approves the request and then Infisical refuses it. So subject alternative name, we'll leave empty. Certificate validity, we'll leave at 1 year, the same thing we had set up in Infisical. Key usage, we'll choose digital signature and key encipherment. And then key size will be 2048. Now here for root certificate, we're going to point this at the trusted certificate profile that we just made. And then lastly, extended key usage, we'll put client authentication. Again, this matches the Infisical profile. So now renewal threshold. Renewal threshold is a percentage of remaining life. So 20 means that this device is going to ask for a new certificate once 80% of the lifetime of this certificate is gone. So with a 1-year certificate, that'll be around 10 months in. That feels reasonable. And then SCEP server URL is where that endpoint URL from Infisical is going to go. So let's go grab that. We'll head to applications. We'll click on our application here. Under settings, I can click on my SCEP profile under enrollment methods, and I can copy this SCEP endpoint URL. Head back over here, and we'll drop that in there. Recall, this has to be reachable by all of your devices. And then here, allow apps access to private key. We can leave not configured. We'll go next. And once again, we'll add our group. Next, and create. Now, again, these policies are per platform. So I've just set this up for my Mac device that I'm using as my test device. If you have Windows, you would have to do a separate 2 profiles for Windows, the trusted certificate profile and the SCEP profile. The Infisical side is shared. We just have to point them at our Infisical endpoint. Now we can sync a device, or we can wait for its next check-in, and then we can verify. I'm going to sync it, so I'm going to go over to Devices, My Mac Device. I'll click on it, and I'll click Sync. And then here in Intune, if I click on my SCEP profile, this report will take a little bit, but if I click View Report here, I can see that for my computer, it did succeed. Now, if for some reason it's failed, we can head back over to Infisical, and we can check our audit logs. This will record what Intune said when it was asked, and it'll tell you which side refused. So here I can see my SCEP enrollment. And we can also check on the device itself. On the device itself, I can go to Keychain Access. And here within the system keychains, I can see that I have my Jake's root CA R1. Then I also have my Microsoft Intune MDM device CA. And we can see it expiring in 1 year. Now on Windows, that's going to be Cert LM or Cert MGR. Now if I head back over to Infisical and I go to my application, I can see in my certificate inventory that I have the certificate present as well. These same certificates are going to be listed here with the expiration date, the validity, the issuance information, and all of this important information centrally in one place. So what happens when all of these certificates expire? When a certificate reaches the renewal threshold, Intune re-enrolls it through that same SCEP profile with a brand new challenge. So the renewal is validated just like that first request was, fully automated. So to summarize all of this, the trusted profile from Intune installed our CA's certificate on the device. The SCEP profile in Intune, that second profile, gives the device a single-use challenge and then also gives the endpoint for Infisical. The device generates a key pair, it keeps the private key as always, and it sends this request to Infisical with the challenge attached. Infisical checks the challenge with Intune, it signs the certificate with your CA, it sends the certificate to the device, and then it also reports the certificate back to Intune, which is why it'll show up on certificate reports after about a day. And when you set up Wi-Fi or VPN or radius authentication later, you point it at this same CA. And one last thing, that certificate authority that we built in Infisical isn't just for Intune. SCEP is one of the 4 protocols that it supports, but we have other enrollment methods, API, EST, and ACME as well. So this same certificate authority with the same root that your devices already trust could issue certificates to your servers, your internal services, and your Kubernetes workloads as well. Now I'll leave guides for Nginx, Apache, Windows Server, and Cert Manager below as well. Now, if you move off of Intune later to something like Jamf or any other MDM solution, you just rebuild the profiles in the new MDM and then enrollment in Infisical. So the CA will stay as it is, the certificates that are already issued will still remain valid, and your radius configuration doesn't have to change. So that's a certificate authority that you own, issuing certificates to your managed devices with no Windows server anywhere involved. The written guides are in the description. If you want to take a look at that, again, you could follow step by step. If you have any questions or something didn't work for you, leave a comment. I reply to every single one. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll talk to you in the next one.